Coming up, cutting grass is a chore to some, a relaxing pastime for others. But mowing your lawn could damage important microsystems.
There's been a perception of a perfect lawn having no weeds and so forth, but we've got to go back to using our native grasses.
We cut into No Mow May, a UK initiative to boost wild plants and feed pollinators.
By just leaving the lawnmower alone, we're actually doing something, and we're enabling the world to be a much wilder place.
An environmentalist demonstrates how she grew her own genes, and seaweeds have earned a nasty reputation as invasive. We look into these often misunderstood organisms, what makes them choke our shorelines, and whether they could help save the world.
They provide a three-dimensional ecosystem to not just my jellyfish, but lots of other organisms.
Just 2 degrees is on now.
It's a win-win. You grow more seaweed, you reduce the carbon.
It is looking like another year of misery across Asia after the World Meteorological Organization reported the region was the worst hit by climate change last year. April has set the tone for temperatures in Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, India and Myanmar, where the heat index soared to nearly 50 degrees Celsius. It's been so hot that Bangladesh and the Philippines have had to close schools.
Students across Asia got a real-world lesson in the dangers of climate change.
There are reports over the radio and on TV that children are fainting in the classrooms.
The Philippine authorities have stepped in, saying it's too dangerous for the children and closed thousands of schools in Manila. Many classes continued online, but students in poverty-stricken areas with less access to internet and computers risk missing out. But they and their teachers agree that the heat is unbearable.
So dito po sa Pilipinas po sa atin, sobrang init po talaga yung as in nakakapaso na po talaga siya ng balat. Hindi po siya tulad ng karaniwan lang po dati na init na tolerable naman po. Ngayon as in hindi po talaga ako makatagal sa init.
Po rin kami kasi let's say for example ako po at my age, syempre pag sobrang init parang tumataas na rin yung presyon, yung aking BP.
Temperatures soared to 43 degrees Celsius. Combined with humidity, it felt more like 50 degrees to the human body. Exposed to high heat for long periods, young students are actually more vulnerable than adults to heat-related illnesses like dizziness, fainting, vomiting, and headaches. But farmers don't have the option of staying at home while their crops and livestock literally bake in the fields. Many haven't seen rain since last November. Whether it's crops on land or fish farms in water, many are losing out and ending up deep in debt.
Minsan kasi may bunga na pakuan, di lumalaki sa sobrang init. Kaya yung puunan mo medyo nagiging delikado. Minsan di mo nababawi.
And this is only spring. Even more intense heat is expected in the summer, and it'll sting millions across Asia as historic heat waves become the new norm.
Well, it's time to mow your lawns, but less. The annual initiative No Mow May is here. It's a month-long movement first organized by the UK environmental charity Plantlife in 2019 that urges homeowners to let their lawns grow throughout the month and throughout summertime. It's meant to coax certain plants and animals back into urban areas because in the last century, a whopping 97% of wildflower meadows have been eradicated by human development, leaving many plants, fungi, and pollinating insects with nowhere to go or grow. And a wilder lawn does a lot more than attract the birds and bees. It also reduces urban heat and locks away atmospheric carbon underground. People mow their lawns because I guess it's indicative of cleanliness. And of course, it helps deal with lawn diseases like brown patch. How do you get people to put that thinking aside?
Yeah, well, great to be with you, and thank you for having me on your program. So partly we put some of those old aspirations to one side just because nature really needs our help at the moment. And in every small bit of action we can do just enables all of us to make a little bit of a difference. And what's really important, Reagan, at this time of the year is in the UK where it's still pretty cold, it's a bit damp. If we can get our lawns really thriving, lots of species, lots of different types of plants. This time of year, it's really good for nature, it's really good for insects, and it's really good for wildlife. So it's just the right time of the year to be thinking about really healthy lawns. And at this time of the year, fortunately, there's not too many brown patches and there's not too many problems.
The organization wants a world rich in wild plants and fungi. When I think of this, an image of Will Smith's I Am Legend comes to mind, where you have these grasses and wild plants just inhabiting these metropolitan areas. To what extent do you want people growing wild plants and fungi?
Well, what a great visualization. I love that. We think everybody, well, it'd be great if everybody was interested in supporting a wilder world around us. Fungi are quite difficult, Reagan, to grow in a managed way, but certainly in terms of plants, we can all do something different. The whole thing about lawns is that, in fact, if we leave our lawns unmowed, we just put the lawnmower in the shed for the month of May. Over the last couple of years, and this is the 5th year we've been doing it in Plantlife, we've identified over 250 types of plants coming through on our lawns, and more than 100 different types of pollinators. So, in fact, by doing nothing, by just leaving the lawnmower alone, we're actually doing something, and we're enabling the world to be a much wilder place.
Do you find that you get a lot of opposition, and how do you deal with that specifically, and trying to convince people that this is beneficial to the planet?
So we did some polling in early April, and I think I mentioned earlier this is the 5th year of Plantlife's No Mow May, and around 46% of people have said they won't be mowing their lawn in May. So that's great. That's already a really good number. And around about 17% of people said they would be cutting their lawn, and that's actually okay. People cut their lawn for all kind of reasons. It's a utility space. Their kids play on it. You know, they kick a football around. There's no problem with that whatsoever. I think whenever you're working on these kind of change programs, these social change programs, you just try and encourage people to think a bit differently. And for those people who go onto the Plantlife website, specifically responding to your question, how do we help? We enable them to download posters which refer to a wildlife lawn, that people are taking a deliberate action not to cut the lawn. So they're not just being lazy, they're not just sitting back and letting everything go. They're taking a very specific action not to cut their lawn, and they can download a poster. They can print something off, and last year that really helped. That was a great success because people were able to say to their neighbours, "Look, this is deliberate, and don't worry. Later on in the summer, it'll look tidy, but at the moment, I'm leaving it alone."
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, this is not the first No Mow May. Do you find a lot of people continuing growing their wild plants past the month?
Yes, people do continue beyond May. What we find and what we really encourage actually is for some lawn to be cut and for some of it to be left. And the reason for that is if you have different heights of lawns, you get different kinds of plants, and insects and butterflies and moths, they actually nest and they rest at different heights of grasses. So beyond May, we encourage people to leave bits of their lawn uncut if they're happy to do so. But also to cut some areas and have some short grass. And certainly I've got a couple of small lawns either side of my drive, and I let one of them go, and that just it keeps growing through until September when I cut it, and the other one I keep a bit shorter. You get quite a difference between the two sides of the drive, and that's really the sweet spot. That's what we really encourage.
Well, since we're on the topic of photosynthesizing organisms, let's talk about seaweed, which is being used a lot more of late. You can find it in everyday products, from cosmetics to medicine, pet food, even toothpaste. In Japan, Korea, and China, seaweed cultivation has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, and serves as a source of food for billions of people. Today, the global seaweed market is valued at nearly $13 billion and is expected to double by the year 2031. But beyond its commercial value, according to scientists, seaweed could be the answer to our environmental woes.
From soup, stews, salads, and sushi, seaweed graces our plates with rich nutrients and flavor. For over 1,500 years, people across Asia embraced it as both food and medicine. Seaweed, or macroalgae, were some of the first multicellular organisms ever to evolve. The plant provides an ideal environment for marine species like fish, crustaceans, and other organisms. These marine plants flourish along seashores, anchored by their root-like holdfasts. Through photosynthesis, seaweeds convert sunlight into energy and soak in nutrients and carbon dioxide from the ocean. The plant produces a staggering 70% of the oxygen we breathe, 3 times the amount of rainforests, and it grows 30 times faster than trees. Its oxygenating and carbon-sinking properties has made it an attractive tool for tackling global warming. For example, in Britain and Ireland, farmers are adding seaweed to livestock feed to help reduce methane, a greenhouse gas 30 times more powerful than CO2 at trapping heat in the atmosphere.
Seaweed additives can reduce methane substantially in ruminants. In particular, the red seaweed has been shown to reduce methane by 80%.
But scientists say the scalability and untapped potential of seaweed remains unrealized. They project if 9% of the world's oceans were covered with seaweed, we could negate 50 gigatons of the greenhouse gases we release into the atmosphere in any given year.
I guess different people have different opinions of seaweed depending on where you're from. Talk about your experience with seaweed.
My experience has been quite positive with, people in my field, the marine sciences, developing really good nearshore aquaculture farms and also protecting those wild seaweed forests. And of course, there's also other people who are doing offsetting of increased carbon dioxide by trying to control that with growing, it's a win-win. You grow more seaweed, you reduce the carbon, or there are other groups that are sinking seaweed to the deep and trying to sequester that carbon because it should really be locked up in those billions of years. But because of our emission levels in the industrialized world, the Anthropocene, we have released all of that from its safe storage, and so trying to put that back into the deep.
We here at Just 2 Degrees are also, I think, a testament to seaweed as a food source. Our producers here eat seaweed snacks all the time. They're this light, crispy, very delicious. But where I'm from, the Caribbean, we have a huge problem with seaweed, particularly during the turtle nesting season. We see thousands of turtles come to beaches, but quite often seaweeds like sargassum are a big problem. The turtles get entangled in them. When the sargassum makes it to shore, there's a really bad smell that comes from it as it decays. What is making some seaweeds grow out of control and become a problem?
Yeah, so that's also the alternative. So we see things from a positive side, but because we have the problem of lots of grazers and decline, but in the alternative, if there are uncontrolled release of wastes and also boats dumping their waste and or factories or a lot of growth and phosphates getting into the water, that is essentially the best fertilizer for seaweeds. And so what is with things like sargassum, they're actually huge growing networking macroalgae plants, but when the waves break them apart, they get broken off and can drift, and they still provide a lot of three-dimensional structure for floating ecosystems, and they drift and carry things into new waters, sometimes unwanted introduced species. And so when you have a problem of overgrowth of seaweed, it's usually related to too much nutrition for the seaweed, things that we wouldn't consider nutrition, but things that contain a lot of phosphates and nitrogens that are like nitrates that are of the type that will allow the plant to fix and grow and then photosynthesize a lot and continue to expand in size.
Just for those who aren't too chemically inclined, I just want to be certain that you're saying that quite often there's a decline in animals that feed on seaweed, as well as the pollution, man's pollution is feeding seaweed, things like nitrates. Would that be coming from farms per se?
So it could be farms, it could be just improper, treatment of waste that normally would the affluent, like what comes out of waste is not properly being treated or released properly. And so normally those types of things, phosphates is a big one because if you look at the list of ingredients in any kind of fertilizer, although seaweeds are not plants, even though we think of them as plants, they're entirely different group in evolutionary speaking, but they, like plants, they need to photosynthesize to do throughout their entire life, but then also for their life history. They have a complicated life history, and things like sargassum, they can produce these spores that will easily be popped under the right conditions and then just make more copies. So if they are getting enough fertilizer and the right temperatures, so the warm temperatures also can actually cause a rapid increase in seaweed growth. And we see that when we grow aquariums. Now, we don't really eat sargassum. There are some kinds of sargassum that is eaten, but the typical one, the one you're talking about that's entangling the sea turtles, that's not really an edible one for humans.
What are your thoughts on growing more seaweed as a potential carbon sink for greenhouse gases like methane?
Although it would maybe work, like, let's say you had some kind of seaweed farm on the top of a mountain, or something where you could sequester a lot of CO2, but doing that in any kind of open, system, I don't think is advisable because of the fact that so the way that these seaweeds do spawn and reproduce is like a mass spawning in many cases, and so unless you have it in an enclosed area where you can treat things and keep things from getting out of control in the wild, then I don't think it's advisable.
Imagine growing your own clothes. Well, from seed to style, textile activist Justine Aldersay-Williams set herself the challenge of growing her own jeans back in 2022. Her goal was to get in touch with traditional textile methods and avoid the environmental impact of fast fashion on the environment. Justine is the founder of textile community. The North West England Fibre Shed started the project with several others to reintroduce native textile crops to the industry.
After about 600 hours growing, weeding, retting, breaking, scutching, hackling, hand spinning, indigo dyeing and weaving, on the 23rd of August 2023, Mohsin Sajid cut and sewed the UK's first pair of 100% homegrown jeans.
Oh, it's stunning, isn't it?
We almost don't have the correct language. We haven't been raised within a regenerative system. We've been raised as consumers within a capitalist, colonialist system. So it's kind of hard for us to even verbalize what's needed, but actually design should be being led by farmers.
The goal of this is to go from seed to cloth and really highlight these skills of survivalism and self-empowerment that all our ancestors had. You know, everyone grew their own clothes, everyone grew their own food.
We are an international organisation comprising regional collectives of textiles professionals who work with local fibre and dye, and our aspiration is to work towards regeneratively grown natural fibres and dyes. So we co-create regenerative textile systems, we advocate for existing experts in the field working with quite a niche, what used to be everyday crafts, but are now considered quite rare.
I'm just interested in what I could do right here and now, and to sort of embrace working with the limitations of actually trying to do this in the modern world where time's precious, access to land is difficult.
This is a video of us working flax. As you can see, that we've done the breaking and we're doing the scraping to get the fibres out, and then the combing. And so you don't really need to buy sort of expensive tooling. You can just find things you've got around.
The shuttle, needle, or whatever I use, close to the biggest area of the shed.
pull through.
So we kind of bridge the gap between farming and fashion and help brands and growers connect and transition towards climate beneficial practice. Now, crucially, we think that this systemic change humanity needs to undertake has to come from the ground up, not the top down.
Wow. Happy?
Yeah, really happy.
So from growing your own genes to not being able to grow anything really, Botswana is home to one of the largest populations of hippopotamuses living in the wild on the planet. But take a look at these pictures. This watering hole has a few scores of hippos that all seem to be stuck in mud. They're in there because they need the moisture. The animal's thick, sensitive skin requires bathing often to avoid sunburn. Drought is widespread there. Southern African countries are all experiencing similar conditions. Some have declared a state of national disaster.
We are currently experiencing quite a lot of issues pertaining the climate change, the drought that is currently ongoing. We have lost quite a lot of business. We have not been making any revenues. The river has gone dry. We are currently not getting any clients as we used to. The fishing industry has gone down. Trees are slowly dying. It's not even lush green as you used to experience. Our canoes have run dry and people are actually suffering. It's not only affecting our business as well. The community at large is also not in a good state because of the drought that is currently ongoing.
Now to Sudan, whose crop planting season and agriculture sector have been decimated because of the civil war that broke out in April 2023. Farmers should be planting staple crops like wheat and sorghum at this time, but many farmers were driven from their lands, making it impossible to provide for the nearly 50 million Sudanese there.
Once bountiful lands have become the front line of a bloody war in Sudan. The fighting has laid siege to entire villages and left farmers unable to tend to their crops. Last year, Sudan's agricultural sector produced 800,000 tons of wheat, but fighting in the fertile Al Jazeera region has rendered 250,000 hectares of land obsolete, and it's led wheat production to fall by 70%. In Darfur, which hosts a quarter of the country's population, the World Food Program says there's 78% less food compared to last year. But even if the war stops and farmers could return to their land, the Sudanese people are left battling climate change.
But the other thing that we've seen in Sudan is the impact of the climate crisis and the climate change. Some of the communities I visited in Red Sea State, for example, showed me basic agricultural infrastructure that had been washed away the last time there were significant rains, earth dams that were required to keep water in place to allow for hand irrigation of fields, for example, had been broken through because the rains came much more quickly and with larger amounts than they were anticipating. And so again, you know, we see this overlap geographically between conflict, between climate crisis.
The warring parties have also left nothing untouched, jeopardizing the planting season and farmers' ability to work the land. Fertilizer and pesticide warehouses have been emptied, essential goods looted, and water pumps no longer operational. At the start of March, the World Food Program warned the war could lead to the largest hunger crisis in the world. Sudan is already in the midst of the largest population displacement crisis on the planet, with nearly 9 million people displaced.
Month of June is a key month for farmers to plant key crops for the year. So if we are going to mitigate and prevent a very, very serious situation from unfolding, it's urgent that we get as many of these supplies now into the hands of farmers as possible to allow them to produce.
At a summit in Paris in April, the international community pledged $2 billion in aid for Sudan, half of what the UN demanded. With fierce fighting continuing to rage on in the southeast, the most crucial region for crop production, there's fears the worst is yet to come.
Sudan represents one of the worst food insecurity crisis in the world globally. There are at least 18 million people in acute food insecurity, and within that we have a population of nearly 5 million who are in IPC4. This is on a verge of famine.
And that is our show, but before I leave you, take a look at these images. Parts of India have been reeling under sweltering heat. April was the hottest month in the northeast of the country in 123 years. This drone footage from the western state of Maharashtra shows women drawing water from a well and river. To be clear, the temperatures in April were out of season and well above average for that time of year. Interestingly, northwest India experienced no heatwave days.